Good evening, everyone. I'm Ryan McKittrick, the dramaturg and director of artistic programs at the American Repertory Theater, and it is my great pleasure to welcome David Herskovits back to Harvard and back to the American Repertory Theater, where he just this morning led a workshop with our graduate students in the Institute for Advanced Theater Training. Since founding his Obie Award-winning theater company, Target Margin, in 1991, David has earned a reputation as one of the most adventurous and innovative directors working in this country. He has reimagined classic plays, including Goethe's Faust Parts 1 and 2, and Marlowe's The Jew of Malta, adapted ancient works such as Plato's Symposium, which he paired in a production with David Greenspan's response to Aristotle's Poetics, which was actually performed here at the Mellon School in the summer of 2012, and premiered numerous new works, including the rock concert anti-musical People Are Wrong. He's currently developing a new production of Eugene O'Neill's trilogy, Morning Becomes Electra, that will be staged all over the Abrams Arts Center over 6 hours, and that opens at the end of April. Target Margin Theater was founded with the idea that works of art return us to truths more powerfully by their divergence from a strict illustration of reality. Embracing what is new, unfamiliar, foreign, and challenging, David, as the artistic director of Target Margin, develops work, sometimes over years, which is such a rarity in this country, that investigates what constitutes a theatrical event and expands our assumptions of what can take place in a theater. Some of the most dynamic young artists working in this country, including John Collins and Elevator Repair Service, who presented their 7-hour adaptation of The Great Gatsby at the ART 7 years ago, found an early home at Target Margin. And David continued this commitment to supporting the next generation of theater artists just this morning when he very generously led a 3-hour workshop for our graduating class of acting students at the ART Institute for Advanced Theater Training. And this workshop was actually held in the dance studio at the Loeb Drama Center, which is a space I just learned this morning that David had not been in since he was a directing student in one of the very first classes at the ART Institute in the late 80s. So David and Jennifer, it's been such a pleasure to have you on campus for these past couple days. I hope you'll return. Thank you so much for working with our students this morning, and thank you so much for speaking with us this evening.
Thank you. Oh, thank you so much, Ryan, for that lovely, generous introduction, and thank you, Homie, for inviting us and hosting us so well, and to everybody in the Institute. It was wonderful to be back in that dance studio this morning for a few hours, enjoying myself with the students. It was really a great, terrific experience in many ways for me. I'm going to talk for a little bit, 30 or 45 minutes. I don't know how long this will take. I have a couple things to show you, just to mix it up a little bit. Not a ton of video, but a little bit. And then we can have questions and open it up a little more, right? And I'll try to keep my thoughts together with some notes, too. I have, for many years now, developed a bunch of techniques in rehearsal that I have come to call forced failure, ways of generating material. And typically, they are things like this. We'll take an actor and give that person a monologue, a speech to learn. And I'll give them a few minutes to memorize it. Take that away, go memorize it. Different people are doing different things. Come back in a few minutes. Then we'll do something else. Now we'll do a dance, or we're going to do a different scene. And then 30 minutes later, I'll come back and say, now, could you say that speech that you memorized? And we'll we'll record that, typically, in some way. And so the person is trying to memorize the speech and say, to be or not to, right? And then that will, in turn, be passed on to somebody else. Maybe we'll record it on a device. Maybe it will be transcribed by a person. This can be done in myriad ways, right? I can give you something to read and tell you to read it all the way through without stopping, and give somebody else a piece of paper and a pencil, and they have to transcribe it while you're reading it. So of course the person is quickly, then somebody else has to read the transcription out loud, and that reading is captured and recorded. Then those recordings are transcribed with rigorous exactitude right? And they become a new text, a new score. This can also be done in ways that are beyond the generation of language or text. So I can take a group of actors and say, stage a scene. Here's a scene you're working on, stage it. Make your own decisions, who goes where when physically. Give yourself a score of movement. Learn it so you know it. Now perform it for us. We're going to watch it. We'll watch it, and then I'll take two other people and say, now you get up and you do what they did. You've seen it once, go, do it. And then we can video record that or annotate it in some other way. So this can be, there are myriad ways to do this, and it can be iterated in many, many ways. And what results in every version of this, of course, is some sort of a breakdown, right? Is some way in which my own control of the event, my mastery of the event, is thwarted. And I call it forced failure because the failure is built in. There are too many things happening. The time restraint is too severe, and so on. And this is, I hasten to add, a familiar approach, a familiar way of thinking in fine art. So Bryce Marden, a painter from whom I draw a certain amount of inspiration, at a certain point in his career, gave up painting with brushes and started painting with twigs, with sticks. And he said that it was an effort to break my hand, right? That is to say, the command of the act that the artist has is, in a way, too good. And he needs to break it, right? Francis Bacon, the painter, the Anglo-Irish painter, as you may be aware, would throw paint at his canvases, right? Pick up a piece of paint and throw it, et cetera, et cetera. In a different way, if you think of Chuck Close, right? Chuck Close has embraced and worked with severe physical limitations to reinvent his painting in powerful and exciting new ways, right? A different situation, but you see again an artist dealing with, okay, I have here a physical limitation and obstacle. So in the theater, why on earth would I do such a thing? Why on earth would I create those situations to generate that text when I have a perfectly good text that I'm starting with? Often a great text, a famous text, Uncle Vanya or Greek, Euripides or something. Why on earth would I do that? Goodness, homie, get up off your knees. Okay. And of course, it's because in different ways, I feel that what this yields for me is a particular kind of gold theatrically, a particularly exciting new way in which the language breaks down and then reconstitutes itself. I hasten to add that we do this a lot. You generate masses of material, and then ensues many layers of editing, selection, and so on, right? So there's lots of raw material that gets embraced here. And of course, then there's a great deal of selection and shaping that goes into it. But I want to read a couple of examples of this. This one is from a play I did called we called it The Inn. It's a classic of Yiddish theater. And we were dealing with very old, out-of-date translation. And it's a moment where a young woman and a young man are in love, and they wind up running away from a wedding. They're in the dark. They're very confused. She doesn't know what's happening. Her feelings are completely in upheaval. And I'm just going to read a little bit to you. And you'll hear there are obvious things that are preserved from the process, but there are also less obvious things. Repetitions, stutters, right? Things like that. It's as if 1,000 Itziks were merged into one, and all loved me, as if there were all kissing me, rending bits of flesh from me. There's a reason for that, Itzik. See where we're sitting. Perhaps the haunted inn is to blame for all this. See where we're sitting. Perhaps those merchants at the wedding weren't human beings at all. I'm afraid, Itzik. Afraid. Fuck, I wish I knew this already. My teeth are chattering. Fuck, is that you, Itzik? Maybe you're not Itzik at all. Maybe, right? So you can hear obviously fuck, I wish I knew this is straight out of like, oh my God, what the fuck is the next line? But there are other stutters. And, so one of the things is there's a kind of naturalness or an ownership of the language that emerges, and also a kind of emotional symmetry that can emerge and be capitalized on. Here's another example. This is from a play that we adapted from Euripides called As Yet Thou Art Young and Rash in our version. It's Euripides' Suppliant Women. And we worked with many, many different versions from different periods in English of the play, and also with the Greek, right? So there was a lot going on textually. But this is it's a messenger speech, right? The messenger comes back and is reporting on the battle, on what happened. And here again, the play very much, in a certain way, you could say, is about loss in wartime, right? And loss in many different ways. So here's how it happened. Could see everything going on. Lights hit you. Theseus, really smart. Has one part on one side. Says to Creon, just want the bodies, to carry them. I don't, dash, long dashes. I don't know what to say. The clouds of the dust that mounted to the sky, the warriors tangled in the reins and dragged this way and that, the streams of crimson gore when men fell dead, or when from shattered chariot seats they tumbled headlong to the ground and amid the splinters of their cars gave up the ghost. It was crazy. It was hard to watch. Lots of things breaking. And it goes on like that. So, again, you see there's something about the horror of that experience, the strange poetry of that, somebody trying to transmit what they've been through, which is obviously devastating. And then choices that I've made about mixing back in a quite straightforward passage from what was a late 19th century translation of it that's poeticized in a more familiar English way, that's Englished in that way. And then here, this is a little bit of raw text. This one is a little more subtle. This is from when we were working on Uncle Vanya. So I don't know how well you know that play, but if you call it to mind, there's a moment where Yelena, or Helen, has talked to the young girl, Sonia, and Sonia has confessed that she's in love with the guy, and Helen is reflecting on this and kind of realizing that she has her own feelings for the same guy. It's just an audio clip, so lend your ear. It's about a minute.
How terrible it is to know someone else's secret and not be able to help them. He's not in love with her, that's clear, but why shouldn't he marry her? She's not pretty, but she would make an excellent match for a country doctor of his years. She's intelligent, kind, pure. No, that's not it. How well I understand that poor girl. In the midst of desperate boredom, surrounded by gray shadows instead of human beings who drift by, and you hear nothing but banal chatter. All that anyone does is eat, drink, and sleep. Then he appears. He's handsome, attractive, fascinating, a bright moon ascending in the darkness. To submit to the charm of a man like that, to forget oneself, it seems I'm a little drawn to him myself. I'm a little drawn to him myself. Totally blanked. What happens next? When he's around, I'm not bored. And when I think of him, I smile. Uncle Vanya says I have the blood of a mermaid running through my veins.
Right, so you get the point, right? That again, she knows the speech pretty well, and then curiously, just at the moment of that realization, ooh, I think I'm in love with him. What happens next? Right, that just at that moment of emotional vulnerability or reflection or something happens. So the point, and I hasten to add, that's what we did in the production, right? She was on, that became the text of that monologue in the production. Long pause, what happens next, long pause, etc. All those little glitches. So for me, the point of this is to create things that I never could have planned, right? To create things that are way beyond what I could have envisioned, not what I would have worked out in advance or thought of. For me to let go of interpretive ideas, to let go of my own goals in that way, and to break the dead hand of mastery, right? To break my own control of the event. And what that means for me is not knowing. And I try to do that in as radical a way as I can in every phase of the work. Trying to embrace not knowing the motive of what I'm doing, not needing to know the goal of what I'm doing, certainly not needing to know the result of what I'm doing, right? Letting go of all that stuff. In as radical a way I can. I can make myself do that. Letting go of my control, letting go of my expertise, letting go of my ego. This is, I should add parenthetically, very much against the going ethos professionally in the culture of theater, right? Directors know things. Their job is to explain stuff, right? Directors are quite controlling people, and they're good at it. You know, they know where, and people like that. We know where we're going. And that's why in the theater you get all this, what I think of as guruism. You know, directors cast themselves as leaders in this way, and they get acolytes and so on. And so my position in working is completely against that, I hope. I aspire to that. And that implies, again, also on the side I should say, that implies a whole worldview. You know, it implies its own kind of ethics and politics, right? Because if you're against mastery, well, I think that also means you're against slavery, right? It means that you want to question the idea of somebody being the boss or being in charge in a global way. It implies a whole psychology, right? If an idea about how things emerge out of a person, and the notion that there are things that can be released if you and I are struggling and failing to articulate things that we hadn't planned, and somehow something inside of us will be unlocked that's deeper than that. And if you want to go even further, it could imply a whole metaphysics, right? The world is shot through with transcendence. All kinds of forces are coursing through and around us, forces we have no idea of, glimmers. And maybe if we let go of those things and resist our own control, we can tap into that energy. Everything around us has some kind of other shape. If you want to go there with me, you don't have to. But though all of those things are, to me, exciting and inspiring, and they move me to a large extent. And if we can find the right key, we can unlock all of that uncontrollable mystery. So, I like to say, I begin always from a place of joyful not knowing. Joyful because it's fun, and I want it to be a pleasure and entertaining, and I mean that very sincerely, I'll come back to it, and not knowing in all of these dimensions that I'm talking about. I want to show you, before I keep talking more, let me give you one example of what this looks like. Ryan mentioned the dinner party, so I thought it would be fun to play that again. I talked about it more when I came to the Mellon School in depth, and I don't want to get bogged down in that. But let me play you. This is just about a minute and a half of the beginning of the dinner party clip, just to give you a taste of this. And the one thing I will say in advance is, it is, in fact, as you may or may not be aware, depending on your familiarity with the text, a quite literal and exacting translation of Plato's Symposium. And I'll say a little more about that in a second.
Get a date Hi, everybody. I'm David Herskovits, the Artistic Director of the Theater. And I just wanted to take this opportunity to welcome you to this evening's performance. So a couple of quick things before we get started. Be sure to turn off your cell phones, any electronic devices you may have. Be sure to join our mailing list. And as you may or may not be aware, we are in the middle of our second of 2 seasons devoted to the Greeks. So as part of that, be sure to join us in the spring at CSC for the Frogs in a new adaptation by David Greenspan. But tonight, we have for you the dinner party, then a brief pause, and then the argument. And we feel strongly that these are one event and invite you to enjoy them as such. So, dinner party begins when one friend asks another about this extraordinary, legendary, stupendous dinner party.
I'm glad you asked that. That dinner party was extraordinary, legendary, stupendous. Everybody asked me to tell them about the dinner party. They say, Mary, tell me about the dinner party. I hear you know all about the dinner party. The little girl at the pie factory, she was cutting me a piece of cake, and she turns to me and she goes, hey, aren't you the one that knows about the dinner party? Tell me about the dinner party. And now you understand I wasn't actually there. But I heard about it. And in fact, I heard about it first a long time ago from my high school drama teacher, who heard about it from Eleanor Roosevelt's secretary's niece, Mary. And that Mary, she was actually at the dinner party. And you know what? I passed the stories by Stephanie, and she said they're all pretty much true. So I'm like telling the truth, you know. And you know what? Stephanie wouldn't yank me. She's my teacher. She's made me a better person. You know what? You could do with a little Stephanie in your life, because Ian, you're a mess. Okay, now, okay. Now I'm going to tell you what happened at the dinner party. I'm going to be married.
You are married.
Oh, no. I'm going to be Eleanor Roosevelt's secretary's niece, that Mary. The Mary that was actually at the dinner party. I'm going to be that Mary now, okay? Stephanie! Hey, Stephanie! Stephanie! Girlfriend! Hold up! Hey! Wow! You're looking hot tonight. Not like you don't always look hot.
So one thing that I want to, in the context of this conversation about generating text, that performance was improvisational. That is to say, we gave it a structure, right? We set certain language that was key or certain core ideas, but the vast majority of what people are saying was made up on the spot, right? And then but it was agreed that, as I say, certain important cues, that the ideas and the content of the action and the thought were consistent. So it was very highly structured, but the idea was that the actual surface of the language was open and could be reinvented. And in a certain way, that comes from a quite traditional philosophical approach to the text, which is the idea that the language is masking these concepts. And if we can just scrape away the language, then we'll get to the clarity of the ideas, and we just want to make those ideas clear. And so we tried to embrace that notion. So the staging of it was all fun and playful and so on, but that was nothing. We spent weeks in working on this, just reading the symposium and trying to understand what the argument of each one of these sections was so that the person involved could make it, right? What the questions were and so forth. There are many other obvious choices and challenges about that particular text, turning it into a piece of theater, choices that I made that are quite heterodox or challenging to the work in different ways. And again, I don't want to get bogged down in that, but it gives you an idea of me trying to embrace the affinities of that, make a strong choice about bringing it into the present, and also honor the truth of the original, as I understand it, in a playful way. So all of this unknowing ramifies into the methods that I use, it ramifies into the results and the product, and it ramifies into the audience experience. Every dimension of this work, I think, springs from this. So with the methods, forced failure is one of the things, but there's also, in rehearsal, I have a very, very high tolerance for not knowing things and a very ready willingness to say, I don't know. And to a certain degree, a resistance to explaining things, right? Again, very often in these situations, people want things to be explained. Actors want things to be explained. Designers want things to be explained. They want you to tell them what it means or why you're doing it. And one of the challenges that I present to them is that I won't do that so easily. I'll give them a bunch of different possibilities, you know. I'll try to invite them into it. But to a certain extent, in my experience, the moment that you give somebody an explanation, a creative collaborator, an explanation, why am I doing this? They go, oh, okay, got it. That's the reason why. And then you know what happens? They die, right? They die a creative death of the imagination. And I want to use their creative imagination. So I resist that, and I resist explaining per se. It also means there are other aleatory processes I have an enormous fondness for. It depends on the project and so on and what we're doing, but found things, random things that occur will be captured and incorporated into the show. Sounds, events, mistakes, accidents, and so on. The forced failure is a focused way of doing that, but as a general principle, those the randomness of things is something that I try to be open to and embrace. And personally, this comes from my own hunger to do the things I don't know how to do. If I'm looking at a play or an opportunity for work and I feel like, oh, that's really interesting, I can see how to do that, I will certainly not work on it. I'm working on Morning Becomes Electra because I don't know how to make it work. And that's exciting to me. I really don't. To put it another way, and I'm very fond of saying this, I know what I know. I'm not interested in what I know. I'm interested in what I don't know. And this is all a pursuit of that, truly. And my experience is that, again, to come back to the sort of notion, the false, in my view, false notion of a master, is that there's a kind of complacency that comes from feeling, yes, I can do this, and God, I'm good, and will be wonderful. Look, I'll lead you, and here's what it all means and how it all fits together. This is great, isn't it? And in my experience, people who really do serious work at a high level, at the most interesting level, are never sitting around patting themselves on the back saying, God, this is great. I'll tell you what it means. They're moved by, self-doubt and personal anguish over the shortcomings that they see in their own work. I'm not saying that you have to be in anguish and suffering, but I try to take a posture of, not patting myself on the back about how good things are, but saying, hey, I don't know. What could this be? And of course, I invite my other collaborators to do the same, actors, designers, et cetera, and I try to support that. Not just to resist explaining things to them, but offer them support where I can. I can always give somebody an explanation if they want. I can always give them a motivation if they want. And I tell them that. But I try to explain to them where I'm coming from so I can say, look, you figure it out. You show me something that I haven't planned. And that's the most exciting thing to me. In working with actors, this happens very clearly a lot of the time. You come into rehearsal, you have a great idea of what you want to do. You say to the actor, hey, I got it, you do this. And guess what? The actor says, oh, I hate that, I can't do that. They don't even try it. I don't want to do that. Oh, that's awful. Now, at that moment to me has to be embraced as a great moment, right? And I always feel like, okay, great, what do you want to do? All those plans that I have, fine, whatever. I'm not worried about it. Because essentially, I'm not afraid. A number of things will happen. They'll do the thing they want to do. It could be that it's a great idea, and I love it. It could be that it's a terrible idea, and I'll let them do a little bit, and they'll figure out that it's a terrible idea, and it'll go away, and they'll want to do what I want them to do. But the best thing is that they'll do something that's not quite right, and then we'll work together, and we'll come up with something else that neither of us has envisioned. Which brings me back to what I was saying a minute ago. And that's the most exciting thing. And that's if there's anything meaningful creatively about working in a collaborative form, it must be that. Or you're Gordon Craig just telling people that they're puppets. Which, whatever, you may want to work that way, but to me that's not exciting. This is also another point where fighting the mastery becomes a little bit political because the terrible truth is that people like to be told what to do, right? And so I have to, with my collaborators, especially with actors, I try to really support them and explain where I'm coming from. And it's easier for me now because I've done it for many years and they've worked with me, or if they haven't, they know what the work is like and they get involved. But especially at the beginning, you have to earn people's trust, right? And they really want you to tell them what to do. They want you to be the master. And that's a shame, but what I want to do is deprive them of that and say, no, I won't. And if they really need me, just come in and say, this is what you do, this is where you go, this is what it means, I can do it. And I have done it easily. My ability to do that partly is the basis on which my confidence in doing this other stuff resides, honestly. The audience. This is maybe the next step, and in a way maybe the most exciting thing artistically. In terms of the actual result, the work that you create, I have an enormously high tolerance for mystery, for resistance in the work, right? I want people, I think the favorite thing that somebody said about my work over the years was that you don't have to understand it to get it. And I love that you can be in the audience and you have an experience, but it's unfathomable, right? It's endlessly mysterious and yields so much. And that means that I favor working in a number of ways. One of them is I really embrace what I like to think of as the polyphony of the work, right? In a theatrical event, you have all these things happening at the same time. There's the design that you're looking at. There's the text that you're hearing. There's the story, different from the text but related to it. There's the thematic content or other ideas that also may be around. There's the other stuff that you're hearing in the sound environment. There's the built environment that you're looking at. There's the texture of how the performers are presenting that language, right? The dynamics and the emotional content and the expressive property of that, whatever their presentation is. All of these things are going on and more. And they're unfolding over time. And what I'm interested in is the interesting disposition of those events over time, as they line up sometimes and diverge at other times, Most often you go to see things in the theater, and mostly people are concerned about having them line up most of the time, right? Because again, in terms of the audience experience, the going program in our theatrical culture is to explain the piece to the audience, right? Directors have an interpretation, right? They have an approach to the work, and they're trying to give that to the audience, to get it across to them. Or they frame it in another setting so as to bring it closer to the audience's familiar world, right? Oh, I see. Agamemnon's just like a general. He wears a flak jacket and has a jeep, you know, and that sort of thing. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just not what turns me on, right? All of that stuff is, the director and the team they're killing themselves to take this strange, alien, recalcitrant work and bring it closer to you so that you can assimilate it, right? And that's precisely what I'm not interested in. What I'm interested in is saying, oh, that thing is so different from me. Wow, what do you make of it? I don't know. Why would I want to deprive that of my audience of that? That's the thing that's exciting to me when I look at those plays or those experiences. And again, I guess you're learning something about me today, which is I can't resist observing the somehow, I think, latent politics of these kind of things. People like to be led. Part of the problem is that the audience comes in and they want you to explain it to them. They want to get the thing that they know. They want the thing that's familiar. They're saying, you be the master and we'll follow you, please. And what I want to say is, no, I'm not going to be the master and I don't want you to follow me, right? And at its profoundest level, that's a very deeply held belief on my part in every way. But certainly in the cultural relationship that we find ourselves in, I want to create a world where that discourse is open. And somehow the experience of going to some weird play like that presentation of Plato's Symposium is also changing the culture on that level as well. Like, wow, I can go out and, you know, there's a certain kind of work, and I'm sure you've all seen it in the theater, particularly in the movies, where the goal of the artist is to make sure that everybody in every seat is feeling the same thing at the same time. It's sad now. It's really sad. Sad, 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 sad. Everybody's sad. If you're all sad, I'm good. Right? Right? You know what I mean. And as you can tell, that's the opposite of what I'm interested in, right? That I want to make this work where, like, wow, she's sad and he's laughing. What does that mean tonally? What, you know, the texture of that tone is complicated. Let me say, I said joyous not knowing, and I feel like if you make the kind of work I make, I have always felt a special burden to be extra inclusive of my audience, to make it entertaining, to make it fun, to tell stories, to have jokes, to have, right? There are lots of moments in the plays that I make that are just sad, or that are straightforward in that way. It's just a matter of dialing that up and down artfully. That's the thing that I'm interested in, right? Otherwise, you wind up with stuff that's, and we all know this, kind of off-putting and pretentious, artsy gobbledygook, right? But if you're going to do something that's aesthetically challenging in this way, I feel like you must, especially in the theater, where the form is ephemeral and the people are present, they can't put it down and come back to it, right? You must make an effort to invite them in easily and make it joyful for them too. So the dinner party is full of jokes and silly things, and hi, I'm David Herskovits, you know, and it's not me, obviously. It's a beautiful young woman, you know, but that's also a nod to the framing of the story. So you can enjoy it as a goofy joke, or you can think, oh, you know, Plato's Symposium begins with multiple framing devices, and that turns out to be one of them, e.g. So that's for the audience. Am I forgetting anything? No. Oh, I mean, all of this adds up to my enormous tolerance for failure. I don't want to fail. I want it to be fantastic. I really do. Anybody in theater who tells you different is just lying, right? We all just want them to love it all the time. I do. After this lecture, you have to all say it was fantastic no matter what you're thinking now. Okay? Just tell me you loved it. That's the way it works in the theater, right? You just say, I loved it. Just do it. But I often say, I'd rather get an F than a C. God save me from mediocrity. You know, I certainly want to do something that's just okay. I don't want to do something that's just okay, right? I want to get an A, but I'd much rather go down in flames and make something interesting happen that we can all learn from, right? And I have an enormous tolerance for that. I am unafraid. And I've managed professionally to create a situation for myself where I can do that, essentially just by raising enough money and convincing enough people that it's good, that they'll clap, so Tinkerbell will live. If you know what I mean. Here's another, I want to show you one more clip, which is, this is from a production I did of a play called Uriel Acosta. It is a classic Yiddish play and exists in many versions, and is retold in many ways in Yiddish literature and in other literatures. I'm not going to tell you too much about it, except to say Uriel Acosta is this very heterodox Jew, and he publishes a book that's very troubling to the community. And there's a moment where the rabbis challenge him about his book, and they ask another rabbi to read it and tell them if it's okay. So this is a little moment where you see that. But I'm showing it to you partly just to give you an example of how all of these different things happening, the design, the sound, the textual mixing, et cetera, the source story and so on, can layer in together. So I thought I would show it to you. I hope it means something.
In Amsterdam, there lived a very smart man with a lot of different ideas about the world and how we should live. He put all his ideas into a book. When some other men read it, they got angry because it was different than their book. It scared them, so they bullied him. They said, "Change your mind or go away from here."
These lights that burn before the sun are like the reason of Uriel Acosta that would outshine revelation itself.
These glimmering tapers don't indeed your son. Why do I remain here? I have nothing to learn from you.
These lights, like reason or...
Stop. Learned in our holy faith, the synagogue transmits to you this volume. Examine it.
Mission to me? Rabbi, these lights...
Examine it on behalf of all, and decide whether its tenets are in accordance with our creed. Its author worthy to be regarded as a son of our people.
How far more fearful the task when the fate of another is involved in the issue.
Take it, Doc.
The Council of Three expect your sentence.
I accept the awful task. I take this book committed to me by the rulers of my people, and heaven aiding me will judge of it by the light heaven has itself afforded.
That is not the tone of a judge. The book is but a book to you. Its author, nothing.
Now, as at all times, I can see in the mind's eye, in their stiff, painted clothes, the pale, unsatisfied ones appear and disappear in the blue depths of the sky, with all their ancient faces like rain-beaten stones, and all their helms of silver hovering side by side, and all their eyes still fixed, hoping to find once more, being by Calvary's turbulence unsatisfied, the uncontrollable mystery on the best.
Good, thank you. So again, it's hard. I know it's hard because the resolution on the video is lousy and the sound is lousy. But I showed it to you partly just to show you that crazy mix of different things happening. It's projections on fog. It's a little bit of Yeats at the end, et cetera, et cetera. It's the flute, and so on. Among other things, and I'm going to wrap up in a second and ask you if you have any questions. What this means is that this attitude of mine about not knowing also characterizes my relationship to the field as a whole. I mean my peers in the theater and other people that I work alongside or with in the same universe. Because have a great, in a way, the most exciting thing to me are these productions that challenge the form in a way. So that when I work with designers, I'm always thinking or wanting to remind people to think, what does design do? What does it do? And get past the most interesting things. Light directs focus. Okay, that's why there are follow spots in musicals, right? And that's not a bad thing, but it does more than that, a lot more. I'm interested in all that lot more. What does clothing do? Well, it can express something about a character, if there's a character around, but it can also be a whole other system that suggests all kinds of other things. What does sound do? Well, there can be the sound of a doorbell ringing. There can be music that establishes a mood, as you often see in the movies traditionally. Those things are great. But what else can go beyond that, rhythmically, texturally, et cetera, in terms of framing the language in the event, and so on and so forth? If the question is, what is acting, right? I'm interested in saying, I don't know, what do you think acting could be, right? People have lots of different answers to that question. Typically, the answer in our theatrical culture is something about pretending to be another person in a believable way, right? Living truthfully in imaginary circumstances, that sort of thing. Again, there's nothing wrong with that, but maybe an actor is something else. Maybe an actor is somebody who can just recount or represent the text in a certain way. They can remember it. Maybe an actor is a kind of magician or a conjurer, right? Sometimes I think when we make a play, we're really doing a conjuring trick. If we all learn what we're doing just right, and we all get together with the right kind of energy, and we do it the right way, in these steps and these words, then, just like magic, something happens, right? Then the spirit emerges. But we're just doing those things. Abracadabra. Oh, I have to stand on my right foot. And then it works. Maybe it's that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And if the question is directing, what's a director do? Directing, this phony job that didn't exist in the theater until about 100 or 150 years ago, right? There was nobody called a director. Now we have directors, right? Everybody who is a director has to come up with their own answers of that. And I've suggested some of what they are for me, but the real answer for me is, I don't know. Thanks. That's what I got. Look, his hand flew right up. It must be good. Good. What do you got?
Thank you for your speech. Actually, what you said, it's Mikhail Chekhov already hint of this.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Okay. Said thank you for your speech.
Yeah.
I said actually what you said, it's already was hint in the book of Mikhail Chekhov.
Yeah, Michael Chekhov, who was a great celebrated acting teacher.
Yeah, and I think all the Soviet attitude also think about this. But I'm a director of theater in Israel, and I came in very capitalist now country here in America.
Right.
And in commercial theater, actually, you have so limited time to do theater, like 2 months. Sometimes if they very
less, yeah.
If you're very lucky, little more. But so this attitude to go and come back, go back, and to search about the way, you don't have opportunity in commercial theater. This first. Second, actors nowadays, I think more than long time ago, need trust of the director, and you have to be something like somebody like Peter Brook, that he already known that if you come here and try to direct us, so you know where you will take us. You're the leader. We trust you. We can play and real game. But if you not really known directors, that you come for a new group, they will think, oh, he don't know what he really want, and it just will be a lot of lose time. And so you speak very nice in very ideal word, but it's not really on fact. It's not really.
Oh, well, I'll tell you, what I'm so lucky about is that I have made a situation in the theater for myself in New York City where I do all these things that I want to do. I mean, I have a theater company and we raise money, and it's small. I mean, I recognize what you're saying, which is true. The circumstances of institutional theater as it exists are very contrary to these kind of things for all kinds of reasons, such as you're suggesting. There's no question about it. I've just come to appreciate what good fortune I have in terms of creative freedom, because I've managed to convince enough people to support what we do with money and enough other artists that it's interesting and exciting that they keep working with me. So as long as I can keep tricking them, it works out okay for me.
So you're lucky.
Yeah, but my hope really is, I know, I appreciate that very much. My hope really is that what I can do is like be a sort of good virus and infect the world with other people, like the other groups that Ryan talked about, so that more people go out in the world. And then after a few years, the world will really become just the way you and I want it. Yes. You know, I hope.
One thing I really want to share with you, the disease nowadays in the theater that I see, it's the words.
Uh-huh.
That the actors really first want to give me the words, give me the how you say, the lines.
Yeah.
And this is the most disease I think happened in the theater, and I will be happy that somebody will really try to find cure for that.
To kind of disrupt that.
Yeah, because the essence of the theater, it's the acting and not the words.
Well, I mean, again, for me, what's exciting is some people think the essence is the text. Some people think it's the acting and not the words, and other people have other ideas, you know, and I love that we live in a world where all those things are. I just don't want anybody to be the boss of everybody else, you know what I mean? But is there another question? Oh, yes, sir, young man. James.
Oh, thank you. So, David, thank you for a very, very interesting discussion, talk, and it made me, I had all sorts of thoughts. One was that probably quite a number of us in this room try to teach in the same way. That's to say, to alert students to those things that can't be explained in texts, or can't be easily explained in texts, mysteries and, in a sense, failures. I mean, successes that are so great that they're almost like failures.
Yes.
So that led me to a second thought, which was, can you think of literary versions of this? That's to say, are there, in your tradition, would there be texts, theatrical texts, where, as it were, the failure is built into the text?
Yes.
And if that's the case, then what do you do as a theatre troupe when you have that kind of very provisional kind of text?
Right. That's such an interesting question. I'm trying to think. I mean, the person who leaps to my mind is somebody who I have to claim as a mentor, really, in certain ways, and that's Richard Foreman. Where Richard, who really thinks of himself as a playwright, and I don't know if you know his work, but is very, you know, he works randomly. He writes scraps of paper automatically and then stitches them together and so on. And it's funny because for me, to come to the second part of your question, it's less interesting to work with that kind of a text in a way, because the writer is already doing the thing, and for me to muck around with it, the tension is that it's Plato, and the muscle of the Plato behind it is what gives me the freedom to do that stuff and try to preserve the tension with the Plato, so the Plato is there, or the Euripides, or whatever it is. There's another version of that I often feel like, you know, I love Beckett, who doesn't, right? It's an easy person to admire. But in a way, I'm not interested in directing Beckett, because I am not smart enough to see a different way to do Beckett other than the way he tells you. That's what I want to see. And that's great. I just don't want to spend my time doing it, because anybody else could do it, or many other people could do it, and they could very likely do it better than I could. Do you know? So it's sort of the same thing. It really does, in a way, come back to the text and the source material. It seems to me. Yeah.
David, thank you so much. So, I just want to say, put several things out. One is that, you know, the artists you talk about, Bryce Martin. I thought about Matthew Barney with the body restraint,
whom I admire.
Body restraint series.
Yeah, exactly.
Or even Bacon, because you know, the throwing of the paint is one moment, but then as the work carried on,
absolutely.
But remember that stain. He always had that black dot, that black spot, you know, which he used, and polkas and all. So my questions really are about failure. So that in each of these artists, you know, who you presented as kind of people doing in some ways what you're doing, that kind of disruption, that kind of failure turned into a particular mode,
Yes.
which has a signature, which has a recognition,
Yeah.
and they proceeded to work with it, you know, and to develop it further,
Exactly.
so that you
Yeah.
wouldn't, you know, in Matthew Barney, it translated into the movies, you know, into
Yeah,
the films
yeah.
that he did, and the construction, even the construction works, etc. So, and then you sort of compounded that. Sorry, I'm going on a bit, but you compounded that in a very interesting way when you said, you know, you like a strong precursor to pull apart. You like
Just now,
something
yeah.
that gives you that resistance.
Correct.
Just like Matthew Barney's, you know, restraint works.
Yeah.
Where he ties himself up and tries and reaches, you know, to make a mark.
Yeah.
So the whole thing is about forces against you. So eventually, is this a failure? Or is this a kind of training? You know, you train a different kind of muscle to succeed in a certain way. And if that is the case, and I'm, you know,
Yeah.
proposing it,
I get you.
then I'm interested to hear what, when people review you and actually think you have failed, what do they say? You know, when they say, you know, this is shit.
I don't know what reviews you're talking about, homie.
Nor do
I can't imagine what
Nor
you're
do I.
you're saying.
Well, imagine.
Okay, I'll try. I don't. Yeah. That's okay.
The failure of the failure.
Yeah.
Imagine that.
I mean, no. It's so interesting. Yeah.
Let me ask you, whether the aesthetic judgments based on the critical review,
Yeah.
based around the failure of failure,
Yeah.
how does that, you know, what are they to hold on to? What are they to say?
Well-
do they just say, sort of, you know, there isn't virtuosity here. The characters are not expressive. Or does your failed theater
Yes.
make them think in more interesting ways about failure?
Well, let me come back to the critics in a second, which I'm happy to do. But it's this question of like what is a failure and what is a success, of course, is totally interesting to me and depends very much on what level that we're cutting into it at, right? Like if you're conducting a pure experiment, then to me, I always think one of the beautiful things about experiments is that when they fail, they succeed. Right? You try something and it doesn't work the way you thought, but that's useful. So there's that very basic assumption. But maybe more interestingly, when this broken-handed technique becomes a thing, right? If I follow you, nothing becomes a set of conventions quicker than an avant-garde, as we all know, right? It becomes its own stylistic or aesthetic habit. And I don't know the answer except vigilance. Do you know? I mean, I often think of Mark Rothko, right? At what point are you digging into a vein that's really, really, really interesting in your Mark Rothko? Or at what point are you just in a rut? Stop with the rectangles already, you know? And I take that very seriously. Like, how is this now? Have I created a new thing that's a vein that I want to mine? I don't know the answer to that question, but I'm excited about that's a thing that I like to grapple with and say, okay, I want to always do something new. Sometimes I worry, personally, that I'm too quick to give up a vein because I'm so hungry to find a new challenge. And I think that sometimes that's a weakness. Like maybe I should do something that's a little more of a repetition of work that I've done so I can dig into it more. I don't know. But I think about that sort of thing a lot. And then the other thing that's relevant, just to restate this, because you kind of said it and I alluded to it in the talk, you know, there's the act of throwing the paint, or there's the thing that you do that's the difficult thing, and then there's the rest of the phases of making the work, which involve a lot of subsequent shaping and handling, so to speak. And so it's hard to say where does the error obtain, if you're creating error, so to say. And then the critics, I mean, you know, does anybody...
That's a serious question, not the ones who just don't like you.
Oh, no.
How does
Of course.
failure create a different
Yeah.
kind of critical
I mean,
position?
I wish that I had a more satisfying answer. Most of the critics who review my work, and I have had a lot of nice reviews, and I'm very lucky to have that, and I've certainly had reviews that go, what? You know, mostly when they're negative, it's because they kind of don't get it. I very often get this review. This is obviously very serious, and they've thought about this a lot. It might be interesting to you if you like this sort of thing. To me, it was totally boring and incomprehensible, which is sort of a nice, bad review, really, if you think about it. It's quite respectful and so on. So there's a certain degree of that. I'm happy to say that I can't remember ever or very often getting a review that just says this is arty and pretentious. I fear that most of all. I do. But even when the reviews are positive, do you know, I mean, and I'm sure those of you who work in the theater have this experience or two as well, or in other forms as well. Even when the reviews are positive, you don't feel that they've read you right. Do you know what I mean? You still feel like I'm so glad that's a great review. I wish you'd understood what I was doing. That's not always true, because there are people who have responded very thoughtfully and meaningfully to things that I do. Anyway, is that am I answering your questions, I hope? Yeah, sir.
Correctly. I'm kidding. I know that from my own experience, sometimes even whether it's in theater or in film, enjoying, like, anticipating the next line or the next, you know, and it is reassuring, but I love, like, being, like, thrown, and because otherwise it's just sort of like, I know my thoughts generally, and I usually speak to, but my comment is, do you ever find yourself at someone else's play, kind of desiring to break the fourth wall and to just sort of stand up and introduce, like a challenge to the actors? Oh God, what an interesting question. I mean, I pretty much don't suffer from that. I feel like that's their work, and I'm, whatever. Right. It's okay. But sure, I guess I haven't thought of it that way, but I guess I see performances and I think, oh, I wish that, what if they did this, or, that's when you see things that you like, things that are inspiring, then they get you going and you think, oh, that's really good, but they could do this, or, it's not even a critical or negative thing. Also wouldn't even know that you weren't, like, part of the play, too. Right. I'm happy to say I haven't gone that far yet. Okay. Yeah, but, sure. I mean, mostly, my questions about disruption and forced failure are just focused on myself. I don't want to make anybody else fail. I have my hands full just making myself fail in a good way. But sometimes when you're watching something that's kind of dulling, oh, sure. Just, Yeah. Well, that's different. I mean, mostly in the theater, when I find things are disappointing, it's kind of, I sort of alluded to this also, it's because I feel like I'm being told something. And I get it. And then I'm not interested. I feel like there's a bunch of ideas, and I get the ideas, and they're okay. Or it's entertaining, and sometimes I have a great time when I go to theater that's much more commercial, and I just, they're doing what they're doing, and they're doing it beautifully, and I can admire the mastery of that, the technique, the skill. That was a great commercial show. It took me on a wonderful ride. I had a great experience. I mean, I am as vulgar as the next fellow, let me tell you, and I really mean it very sincerely when I say I have nothing against that in the culture. I mean, thank God the culture has all kinds of things. It's very soothing too. Yeah, it's all wonderful. It's just not my little corner of it is this particular one that I love and I am into, and that's a particular kind of experience that I value. Thank you. Yeah.
Wonderful talk. So I was thinking about not so much you as someone who's orchestrating failure, but as a planner. And I feel like that comes in these long, multi-season projects. And so, the 2 seasons on Yiddish theater, 2 seasons on Greek theater. So what's the thinking behind it, but more important, what's the cumulative effect of these long periods of exploration? You mean for me, on me? For you, for the people involved, because clearly this is a very deliberate, a kind of setup you've created. It's so interesting. Well, I mean, as I said, I'm turned on by things I don't know. And partly, the extended programming is my attempt to take the example of Yiddish theater. I didn't know anything about Yiddish theater, and I have to tell you all, my preconceptions about Yiddish theater were pretty bad.
I mean, I'm Jewish, and I'm proud to be Jewish and stuff, but I thought, oh, Yiddish theater, it's so schmaltzy and stupid. I knew nothing. And I'll tell you what happened. I went to a gallery show, to a museum show, which you may have seen, called Chagall and the Russian Avant-Garde some years ago. And it just, the scales fell from my eyes. And then I began reading. And anyway, to come back to your question, to me, one of the things I hope is that I just get to learn more. I just get to read more and experiment more with these things and challenge myself, learn more about what I'm doing and what I want to do. And so they're selfish. They're deeply selfish in that way, and successful in that way. I know more about things. I've been working on Morning Becomes a Lecture for 3 years now, and that's fantastic, right? And what it means is that for the people working with me, they get a chance, I hope, to thrive in that adventure as well. Certainly in terms of the making of a particular show, you know, as we all know, there's a kind of work that you can do over time that is very special. And so trying to create that is an obvious virtue of its own. But I will also say for programming, for the audience, for the people who come, I'm imagining an ideal audience member who comes to multiple different things over the course of a couple of seasons, and that they will not just see a series of interesting shows, but they will have a total experience that is much greater than the sum of the parts. That they will be provoked to think in a larger way about the relationships and correspondences and conversations among these works, whatever they may be, or these different reflections on a single work. Like we did a thing last year in working on O'Neill where we programmed 4 small productions, each of which was a separate act of The Iceman Cometh, led by a different artist. And they were quite divergent in their approaches. And then we set up a couple of marathons where you could see the whole thing, one act, 2 act, 3 act, 4 act in a row with breaks in between for changeovers. But it's a similar idea. It's one work, but we're going to give you a chance to look at it and hear it in these different ways. Yeah, yes, sir.
As you're communicating with the audience, either before the show or maybe even afterwards, are there any strategies that you prefer which you find invite them to appreciate the polyphony that you're talking about or come ready to experience that kind of unknowing that's motivating the work?
No, I mean, I think your question is astute because, look, expectations and context are everything. And in the theater, again, if you're going to do stuff that is more challenging, I think it behooves you, and there's a great virtue to trying to tell people that, you know? If people come in and they're expecting a certain kind of play and they get what I give them, they're just going to be unhappy. You know, they're just going to be frustrated, and that's not what I want. So I think that kind of communication is important. And so how do we do it? I mean, partly it's just notes in the program or, you know, the pre-show publicity or things, you know, advertisements about what it is. Again, apropos of what this gentleman was saying, you know, I've created a nice situation for myself where I have an audience that's dedicated, and that's also sort of a prison. I mean, that's a thing that has its bad side as well. But people know if they're coming to a target margin theater show generally, even if they haven't seen one, they've heard that they're gonna, you know, see something different. So that makes it easier because I've just spent time doing that, long enough time that people have that expectation. But still, I'm trying to think, like there are showings earlier, maybe that helps, you know, and certainly after it. I mean, we do all of the same things that theaters, large and small, do everywhere. We have talks, we have discussions, I very much want to, you know, have that conversation. And if you do this kind of work, it's because you want the conversation to go on after the show. So to have somebody go up and say, why were they all, that's Uriel Acosta, why were they wearing glittery wigs? That seems crazy. And then we can have a talk about that. And I'll say, I'm not going to tell you why, but why do you, you know, like whatever. I'll do my thing with them. But we have the conversation. So I don't know, am I answering your question? I don't have a silver bullet about it, but I think it's the right thing to be working on in terms of contextualizing the event. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. In your talk, you spoke just about entirely about the text, the actors, and their movement about the stage. Well, what about the set and the lighting? When I go to theater, and I go to student theater all the time, and occasionally expensive theater, so much of the experience is often how well the set and lighting worked, especially when it's a simple set. Yeah. And I wonder whether you cede control to those specialists or whether you have them go through a process similar to what you described about words?
I love working with designers, and I do it closely and intensely. So I don't cede control, but nor do I grasp control fully. Do you know what I mean? So I love that conversation and doing things. And to me, the most important thing is to challenge the designer to come up with other. I don't want to say, okay, it's got to look like this. It's a kitchen, and it's got to be very blue walls, blue. I want it to feel blue. Yeah, and can you give me that? You know, I'm not interested in that at all. But I'm interested in talking about the work and really getting somebody's first ideas, and then visual research is the closest version of this, where you just, you know, often when you work with designers, they'll just bring in lots of imagery that may have nothing, it may not superficially look like the thing that you're creating, the story or the world or whatever, but can be extremely important. So that picture of that boat on the ocean may be the thing that visually inspires a whole idea about the scenery, even though it doesn't look like a boat, but there are elements of that that are preserved. Do you know what I'm saying? But it's a lot about the conversation you have with the designer. And then, the other thing that I have an enormous appetite for is in the room, embracing and doing anything. So I have stood in theaters with built scenery at cost, right? And said, oh, this isn't quite right. You know what, we're just gonna cut off the top 4 inches of the set. And somebody took a Sawzall and went, and ripped it off, right? So you could see the structure behind it, but, you know, or I remember one time we had a very complicated paint treatment on a floor, and because of the way the theater was, the audience had a very good view of the floor, which you don't always have, right? You're not always looking at the floor, but in this case, they were gonna see the floor a lot because the audience was raked that way. So we had laid out this elaborate pattern of masking tape because there were stripes like this, and stripes like this color was the green, and this color, I can't remember it all. And we did this all, we laid it out, we looked at it, and the set designer and I stood there and looked at him. He said, actually, this is better. We'll just do this. So then I can't remember what we did, but we did the tape. We didn't paint the thing that she had painstakingly drafted and emerged because we were standing in the theater. And I have an enormous appetite for that. Like, I'm unafraid to say, oh, look at that thing that's happening. Let's just do it with the masking tape, and then we'll flip the design that way. And that's more, there's that, you know, that uncontrolled twist away from the thing we had planned that's exciting. Partly, again, as with actors, it's about finding collaborators who have the stomach for that, you know, because that many of them don't, and yeah, understandably, reasonably, you know, you have to have an appetite for that kind of thing, but it's exciting. The sound is a big part on the design side, is a big part of what I do, and we have a sound operator in rehearsal all the time. So there's a very complicated mix of sound that's live, and that's always, I've worked that way for 30 years, and that's a whole other conversation, but it's that the sound, I'm the sound designer, and I have a person playing the sound who's also like a musician, and we're all listening, and the actors are, the sound operator is like another performer, essentially, listening to every scene in a certain way. So there's that, you know. Yes.
I thought that was so effective. Have you ever done a play which is entirely ordered? There's nothing in the room. There's nobody.
You know, I
just thought, my God, that would be
yes,
stunning.
It's so interesting that you say that. I'll tell you 2 things. One of the things that we did this morning with the students in that studio was one of the exercises I gave them was I gave them some scraps of text, and I had them just do what I called a radio play. But essentially, they scored the text, they worked out the thing very quickly about how they wanted to be heard, and the audience, we all sat down and closed our eyes, and each group performed their radio play. So again, it was the same thing. And one of the things I am passionately interested in, and I think is fundamental to the theater, and in a way I'm borrowing here from Gertrude Stein, who speaks eloquently about this, is the kind of struggle between the eye and the ear. You know, when you see things, suddenly you stop listening, right? How do you really hear things? And I work in opera a lot, right? So a little bit with my company, and then also most of the freelance work I have is in opera. And so then there's a whole other level of layering of that, and the way in which, in this eternal battle between the eye and the ear, you know, who is to win? And in what moments, which do you want to prevail, or how do they struggle with one another? And that's what's so exciting about being in the theater.
Yeah, but I think that if you actually think about it as a struggle, then you are setting up that dialectic. Supposing you didn't think about it as a struggle. That's why if you have to close your eyes, closing your eyes is already setting up a particular screen.
Yes.
So if you don't close your eyes, say, you know, I'm sitting here, we're all sitting here, this whole thing is happening, I don't know.
Oh, of course. Oh,
just
yeah.
before us, and our eyes are actually quite open. You know, we look around, they're open. So there is no attempt to subdue one
Of course,
for another.
yeah.
But you're not giving the eye what the normal theatrical experience wants. I think that's more subversive.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
Just, we're sitting here and then the play is going
Of
on.
course.
When you close your eyes, you see the screen of your ear. You understand?
Yeah, or you see colors, or you see, you see the last thing you saw for a bit.
But no, I love that idea. And in a certain way, that's what I'm always trying to do is like, what are you going to see and what are you going to hear and how do they relate or not relate? And I can easily imagine something where we construct a sound score, as you're saying, and we set up a physical circumstance, and then you play the sound score, or it's performed in some way, and whatever happens visually is what happens. I mean, there are still choices visually about, we are in this room, it has wood paneling, it has, the illumination is a certain way, so it's not, everything is a choice always, but still, I take your impulse. I mean, sure, why not? I don't know what that would yield, but I've got time. Yeah, come on. It's just going to come down to who has the budget. I'm telling you. I've heard this bullshit a million times.
Let me ask you one other thing.
Yeah.
We're just filling in. I'm just doing this little filling in. Somebody else another way. So this is what I want to know. Have you ever said, "Oh my God, if I only had this much money, then I would"?
I have a lot
do
to say
this."
about that.
So sorry. Let me
No,
just
it's okay.
turn
Do
this
you want
on.
me to take it for you?
No, it's my. Let me just. Turn
He's
this
busy.
Yeah. This happens to be my grandson. But
Oh.
never mind. Let me just get
Oh.
this
Oh.
one. No.
Shall we everybody say hello to homie's
So
grandson?
this is your alienatory experience.
Yeah, I'm embracing
so
it,
I
man.
just want to know, do you ever say, "Oh gosh, if only I had another 20,000, I could do this particular effect of failure." This
I know exactly what you
I
mean.
could do a better failure.
Of course. I think about this all the time. Look, I'm a producer. I raise money and I spend money. I sign checks. I hire people, right? That's what I do. I run this company. It is a principle for me that the creative genius of what we're doing, I mean genius in the sense of like inner spirit, right, resides in the eye and the ear and the soul and the heart and the hand of the maker and not in the purse. And I try to really walk that work, not only because we don't have that much money and resources are always constrained, right? But because I believe, and I say this now as a person who makes budgets, that budgetary decisions essentially are one and the same as creative decisions. You decide the resources that you have and you decide what's important to you aesthetically and where you're going to put those resources. So when I have that impulse, as we all do, it's like, oh God, if I just had a few more $100 or whatever it is, I could do this thing. I try to step back from that and say, okay, but what am I really trying to do? And is there a way to do it that's not what I'm thinking of, where this limitation, like any limitation, can serve me? Now, that is an ideal, and I think that we succeed in that a lot. And it's also a virtue of necessity, because one doesn't have enough money to do anything, ever, no matter how big or small the theater is. It would be dishonest of me not to say, sure, there are sometimes when you just want to buy that dress and it's going to cost a few $100s more and it's worth it, and so you make that choice, and I do that too. I mean, I'm real about that. But as a working artist in the theater, I really do feel like, and we wrestled with this with Morning Becomes Electra, in fact. There were in the original scenic designs, there were certain things that were we just couldn't afford them. And I was in a position where the honest truth is, I could have just said to the designer, who is my dearest and oldest collaborator, I will just double your budget and we will do it. Because our company is in good financial health, and I knew I could, if I dropped a few more $1,000s there, it would be okay. But I didn't want to do that. I wanted to say, that's not what this company is aesthetically. And so we sat down and rolled up our sleeves and worked through. And I think in the end what we did was we came up with decisions that I like very much better than the original, more fully built thing. And I think that there was an increase in the budget. I think it was like, no, okay, let's make some smart choices and beef up the budget a little bit. But also, what are we, and partly that also comes from my belief that in the theater, and again, this is personal to me and my aesthetic, I don't want to create a production that is trying to be something it is not. Do you know? that is auditioning to be a bigger, if we had the real budget, then we could do this. Do you know? I want to do something that we can do perfectly, that is the thing that we want to make and the thing that I want the audience to experience perfectly, whether we spend a nickel on it or $1 million on it. Yes, that's right. That's exactly right. And again, this is all, a posteriori justification. I mean, it's all just, this is who I am. And I've fabricated these thoughts as I think about why do I do these things and why do I believe these things. But in the end, you make yourself and then you make your work. And then you try to explain yourself to yourself and the world, Wow, this is a good silence. I think we're done, yeah. Thank you all very much. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.